John, the founder of Moxa, who recently got acquired. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me, Andrew.
Yeah, my pleasure. So, for those that may not know you, do you want to give a brief background introduction of yourself?
Sure. I started my career mostly in finance. I was an investment banking analyst and worked in private equity for about 4 years, and then went to business school. But I think I quickly realized during my time in banking and PE that I wanted to do something different. And in my mind, that was something a little bit more entrepreneurial. So that was a big reason for going to business school, to sort of meet new people, see if I could work on interesting startups and ideas. And the one interesting thing I think I did in between my time in banking PE was I actually started a podcast. This was back in 2016, and it was called The Vampire Squid, and it was basically detailing my time in banking, sort of like a share all, very transparent look into what is a day in the life of an investment banker. And that actually became a little bit of a hit. And I think most wannabe investment bankers in college were sort of listening to the podcast at some point. But that was my my first foray into doing something a little bit different instead of like the traditional path that I was on. And I found a lot of enjoyment and fulfillment through it. So went to business school, worked on a couple startups with some friends, learned a lot, realized I should actually go to an earlier stage company and get some more experience. So, spent some time at some earlier stage startups, then founded Moxa about a year and a half plus ago and recently sold it. So,
nice. I love how you started a podcast about investment banking. I might have to check that out.
Yeah. There's some interesting stories that happen when you're pulling 20-hour days for weeks at a time. So
oh gosh, I can only imagine. Well, hey, let's talk about Moxa. I'd love to know, do you want to just give an overview of the problem it solved, what it do, just a little bit about the product to start, and then we'll go from there?
Yeah. So, the initial idea for Moxa came about sort of in the beginning of the pandemic. When I was at business school, I was getting acupuncture from an acupuncturist in Charlestown. And, I would see her on sort of a biweekly basis. But when the pandemic hit, there was obviously sort of close of business, social distancing. And what ended up happening was, instead of being able to get my sort of scheduled acupuncture appointments, we started doing Zoom sessions like this, where she would teach us how to do acupressure on ourselves. And the basis for
acupuncture, I've never gotten acupuncture, but
yeah. So like brief overview of acupuncture is, there's acupoints on the body where if you stimulate those points, they can help relieve common ailments like, stress, headaches, coughs, etc. And when you go see an acupuncturist, they put needles in those points to help stimulate them. So if anyone's ever sort of like massaged their temples, there's acupoints there whenever they're stressed or they have a headache. And the thought behind acupressure is it's very similar, but without the needles. So it's a little bit more safe. So, we weren't putting in needles in ourselves, but there would be certain points on your body where you could massage those points for, between 15 to 30 seconds at a time. And you could feel better from whatever specific ailment you were looking for relief from.
Nice. I love these startups. So you previously were doing acupuncture, COVID hits, and then I assume you were kind of a light bulb moment. Hey, why don't we try to bring this online?
Yeah. And it was interesting because it was sort of towards the tail end of my last semester, and I was looking for what to do next. So I had been in this mode of thinking of startup ideas, working on different projects, and this was something a little bit more personal to me. My sister she has a PhD in traditional Chinese medicine. So, I've sort of grown up in a family of more natural wellness, and I would say drugs or over-the-counter drugs or pharmaceutical drugs are sort of a last resort for us, and we tend to use things like natural therapies like acupressure, or also even just food and diet to improve outcomes versus pop in a pill. And I think it's always shocking when I tell people this, but I can count on one hand the amount of times I've taken Tylenol or Advil, and people are just like, whoa, because I have friends that take it almost on a weekly basis, or whenever they drink, or whenever they have any sort of ailment. So that sort of philosophy had been something that I'd grown up with, and I realized it wasn't really prevalent, at least in the US. So this was something to sort of push that mission a bit, hopefully get people a little bit healthier through more natural alternatives.
That is awesome. Because yeah, there's so many ailments and just I'm not a doctor or anything like that, but if there's a natural, safer way of achieving the same results as opposed to taking medication, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So kudos to you for building a company that actually really, really probably helped a lot of people, I assume. So my next question is, tell me about the moment when you found product market fit. Like, obviously, you weren't the only person with this need or want. You created this. Tell me about like when you had your first users, or did you have a moment when you felt like you found product market fit and you're like, whoa, like I'm on to something new?
Yeah, I think one of the moments were when we talked to this ex lawyer that lived in SoCal, and he was sort of a fitness fanatic. Would be biking all the time on weekends. Would do marathons, and was also sort of the mindset of natural wellness, sort of aversion to drugs. And he was one of the first users where we saw consistent usage over time, and someone who was retained on a more consistent basis. So, as you know, with most consumer apps or consumer mobile apps, retention is by far the most important thing to sort of not fill a leaky bucket. And one of the precursors of at least financial retention is usage retention. So if someone's consistently using your app, they're more likely to stick around and continue using the product afterwards. And he was sort of detailing to us how his acupressure sessions were almost like transcendent. He had done meditation and also did acupressure on top of the meditation that he was already incorporating into his daily life. So it was really neat to hear sort of the way he describes the energy flow throughout his body, sort of how much better he felt throughout the day. Those were really nice stories. And we were looking for more individuals similar to this individual, based on sort of his past, his upbringing, his interests. And those were one of the first moments where we're like, wow, we actually built something from scratch that someone actually really loves and uses on a consistent basis, which was a pretty cool experience.
Nice. I love how vividly you remember it. I always say you never forget your first customer, because I don't know if that was your first, but
not our first. I mean, we had like a lot of friends and stuff like try it and do that, but this was one of the ones that we talked to multiple times, and we're like, whoa, this is feels like there's something here. So
nice. Tell me about how did you get your first customers? What sort of like marketing strategies were you using? How did you get this thing off the ground?
Yeah, the first ones mostly were through organic social. So I had never used TikTok. My partners had never used it either until we started Moxa, but we had heard that TikTok was a great way to showcase and also educate people on interesting topics. I had thought that it was just dance videos for teenagers, but clearly there was such a larger market there that I wasn't aware of. And I think the stat that sort of convinced me over was, like 50% of people using TikTok were over the ages of, I think, 23 or 25 or something like that. So then because our product required a bit of education, we thought that it would be a good platform, at least in short form video, to teach people how acupressure works and some of the benefits of it. And I think we were able to capture a little bit of the wave up from COVID and people downloading social media more and downloading TikTok more. But we had a few videos go viral, which helped get some demand and downloads for our app.
Nice. So you solved a problem that you personally experienced. You got customers. It sounded like you had a good go-to-market engine. What made you decide to sell the business?
Yeah. So for Moxa and what we were doing around acupressure, I think there were a few lessons that we learned throughout building the company. And I think one of them is that educating consumers and sort of handholding them through the process and teaching them is not only very time consuming, but also very expensive. So we had gone through an accelerator and had a little bit of pre-seed funding. But what we realized was it was really tough to have a positive LTV to CAC on peer paid advertising. And while we had, I think, a pretty great organic growth engine, it was sort of tough to, solely rely on the organic portion, especially since we had taken on some funding. We had to make other channels work. And it was kind of tough for us to make sort of the paid CAC work. And I think what we also realized was, at least in the US, people are used to their habits and they are a little bit more resistant to change than we had initially thought. So even though in my mind, everyone should be doing natural therapies or should be changing their lifestyle or behavior before they're taking pills, that's often not the case because pills are really effective. They work really fast and you feel it almost instantly, whereas the side effects may come a little bit later. Whereas natural therapies have, potentially less side effects, but might take a little bit longer for them to immediately feel. So throughout that journey was a bit tough. And we realized that the US market was harder for us to educate. And we realized the Asia market was actually a little bit more primed and better suited for a product like ours. That's sort of how we met our buyer through the Acquired platform. They were a Singaporean-based buyer and saw the potential for Moxa in Asia because people were generally sort of primed for this. And given we're in the US, we thought it might have been a little bit tough for us to also do stuff in Asia. To be honest, we also experienced a bit of burnout. We had been going sort of part-time on it for about 3 years, but full-time on it for about a year and a half. And we thought, time to pass on the reins to someone who could take it to the next level in a region that we thought could be better suited for a product like ours.
That makes a ton of sense. There's one of my favorite sayings in business is one of the hardest things to do is to change consumer habits.
It's so hard.
It takes a lot of education and a lot of time to have that shift over towards, a new paradigm of whatever sort of technology or service you're offering.
Yeah.
But more on the acquisition. Now I'm wondering, okay, so sounds like the app has performed really well in one region. You found a buyer in that region as well. How did you prepare for the acquisition? How did you get ready to talk to potential buyers?
Yeah. So I think a few things. So I had worked in finance before and had gone through a lot of deals and structures and, know what a data room needs to look like. What are the typical asks of potential buyers, granting them access to things. So a lot of it was making sure that we had sort of our books in order, also making sure that we had simple analyses that were customary for a mobile app or a consumer mobile app like ours handy and ready. So we weren't scrambling for, when they would ask for these types of things. That was mostly it. Prepping like a few teaser docs, general docs, financials, sort of charts and a deeper look into retention, cohort retention, all those things were sort of generally prepped before we went on the platform since we knew a lot of buyers would ask for these types of materials.
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah.
That's something we stress a lot at Acquirers. Be prepared before you go live on the marketplace because buyers do need this information to make a decision on if you're going to acquire your business or not. And it just shows the level of professionalism, and that preparation can really be the difference between a successful acquisition and no acquisition. So good job on that. I guess my next question would be, what was your impression of Acquire? Like you listed on Acquire, how many NDAs did you get? Tell me about just kind of the overall, experience before you found the initial buyer.
Yeah. So I don't remember exactly how many NDAs we got, but at least a few dozen. I'd say probably in the 30 to 40-ish range. Had conversations with about maybe 20% of them afterwards who were interested. And then, deeper conversations with the buyer that we ultimately went with. And then we also had another buyer who was interested that we met outside of the platform, someone that we had been talking to beforehand, who was sort of a larger player who had raised a fund solely looking to purchase health and wellness type products like ours. So, ultimately it came down to sort of buyer that we went with and also this other buyer that was off platform. We decided to go with the buyer on Acquired because they were able to make an all cash offer. The other buyer wanted to do sort of a mix of stock and earnouts, which just made it a little bit more messy. And we were looking for something a little bit more clean, which is what we found with buyer on Acquire. The diligence process was about a month, and then also we also went into exclusivity with them for deeper diligence, where we didn't talk to any other buyers. So I think from when we joined the platform, we got a few NDAs and conversations over a couple weeks, did a bit more diligence with our current buyer, went to exclusivity with them. So I think all in all, it was around 3 months or so before we were able to sort of finish and close up the acquisition, and then about another month of transition for moving all the software and pieces over to the new buyer.
Nice. So it sounds like a pretty smooth transaction. You got all cash. You found a buyer that was able to take what you built and grow it into a different part of the world.
Yeah.
See you live on. What would you
we were pretty happy with it. And I think there's a lot of sort of, I think, consumer mobile products out there. We weren't even sure what the process is going to be like, but it was fairly seamless, from beginning to end.
Nice. What would you say your favorite part about the acquisition process was, aside from the money hitting your bank account?
Aside from closing it, what's the favorite part? I actually enjoyed sort of the diligence process, which might seem a little masochistic to other people, but it just goes to show how much work we had done over the last few years, and sort of the knowledge and the know-how, and sort of explaining and sharing that to a buyer gave us a little bit of time to reflect on, like, wow, we did a lot of things over, the last couple of years, where when you're in startup mode, as you know, a lot of time it's just what fires are burning right now. How can I put them out? What's next? And there's not that much time to reflect. So that whole diligence process actually provided a bit of reflection time for me and for the team into seeing what we had built and sort of accomplished, which was, interestingly, a little bit therapeutic.
That's awesome. So you get to go back and review just everything that you built and all the documentation and marketing materials.
Yeah. It's like, why did you make this decision? Why did you do this? Like, what happened during this time period? What was going on here? And we're like, wow, it's like didn't do that as much while we were actually heads down building.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's always fun to look back and just see everything that you built, especially when you're selling the business. That's even the fun part. I like how you frame due diligence, where most people it's a very tedious and almost it's not the funnest part of the acquisition, but I like how you framed it as, you got to go back down memory lane in a way.
Exactly.
I guess, if you had just a few tips for people, other founders that might be looking to sell their startup on Acquire, what maybe tips would you give them if you have maybe 1 or 2 or 3?
I think if you're looking to sell your business, one of the most important things I think is to create sort of an air of competition, that your product is sort of sought after and there's multiple people interested. Because I think once that happens, it encourages potential buyers to be a little bit more serious, to be a little bit more fast in their response, to be a little bit more thorough, when they know potentially there's someone else who's also interested in your product. And I mean, that I think inherently is as much as building a good product that people want to buy, but also playing the game a little bit, and sort of making sure potential buyers are aware that you're not here to just sort of mess around. You're serious about selling the business. There's other parties interested. And, if you're interested, you're in. If you're not, you're out, because you don't want to waste their time, and you don't want them to waste your time. So I think that's probably pretty important to increase the speed of timeline of acquisition and actually get things done. And then I guess the second thing is also really know that you want to sell. Because I think there were some points when we were like, man, should we keep pushing on this or going down this angle as we're nearing closer to the end of the deal? Like, wow, we spent a decent amount of time working on this. Sure, we're selling it to someone else, but it's almost like having your baby go a bit, and you just want to be sure that you're ready for that. And that you've sort of exhausted the things that you wanted to do for the business. And I think we mostly had done that. And I think it was the right decision for us. But even still, we still had some of those thoughts like, hey, maybe we should give it another year to keep pushing and seeing what it looks like. But the decision to sell, I think, should not come lightly. And, I think there is sometimes potential seller's remorse here. So just make sure you really want to sell. And if you do, make sure you run a tight ship type process.
Yeah, that's great advice on both parts. Definitely the part in terms of drawing the timeline and keeping buyers engaged and not letting them just drag out, meetings for months and months and months. You want to run a tight process. We call it a stage gate process or a deal schedule, which sure. So that's awesome you did that. And then I agree. And also, if you're not committed to selling, buyers will step back. They'll see that as a huge red flag. Because the last thing, just like when you're selling a business, the last thing you want to do is waste time on a buyer that's going to take too long, isn't going to actually an LOI. But it's also the same on the other side of the fence with a buyer who doesn't want to issue an LOI and go through due diligence. Then at the last minute, you end up deciding not to sell. And that does happen. But you go to sell, I really like that advice of, make sure that, you're confident in your decision and the reasoning behind it as well. Because it's one of the first questions I always have is, why are you selling? That's advice.
Exactly.
Well, Alan, congrats on the acquisition. I just have, a couple more questions.
Sure.
So you built an awesome company. You scratched your own itch, found product market fit, sold it to someone in a seamless manner. It sounded like everything went fantastic. And now I'm just wondering, what are you up to now? What's next for you?
Yeah. So, sort of interestingly enough, I, along with my partner, we're sort of looking at businesses to buy now.
I hear this so much. You have no idea. People will sell on a buyer and then they turn into a buyer.
Oh, wait, do a lot of people do this on your platform?
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah. I don't know. It's like I know that I want to continue being an operator. I sort of know how tough it is going from 0 to 1. So right now we're just looking to see if there's interesting businesses out there that we would like to buy. And I think sort of the way we're approaching it is I don't know, is our unique style, but I think it originated from my partner. And we had been working on a few startup ideas and going through the process, but he had been telling me about how his parents just sold their restaurant recently as retirees. And, he didn't obviously want to take it over, and they wanted to retire, and they didn't necessarily really care for maximizing necessarily the purchase price, but they wanted to see the business live on and grow. And I think that happens a lot, especially as the older generation is retiring, and these happen a lot with restaurants and car washes or car dealerships or these types of things. But we're seeing, are there other also software products that fit into this camp? And, there definitely are a lot of software products that have been around for, X number of years, who are profitable, who are, owners that are looking to retire and want to see their legacy live on. And, over the last month or so, we've been looking at some of these businesses and sort of evaluating what makes sense for us personally. Are we interested in what this business has to offer? Can we add value? And if we find a good deal, I think we're going to jump on it. But that's sort of where we are right now. Who knows? Things might change. But we think there are a lot of really interesting small businesses out there who would love to see continue living on.
I love it. You're speaking my language.
Yeah.
I think I hope you go down that path, because if you built a business from nothing and you have that operator experience, that scrappy, how do we get the first customers? How do we know we have product market fit? And it's so much easier to identify those things when you built a business, in my opinion. So
Yeah,
I'm rooting for you, Alan. And I hope maybe I'll bring you back on this podcast after you acquired a few things.
hopefully. Yeah, would love to be back on anytime.
Well, Alan, if people want to hear more about your story or just reach out to you, where can they find you?
Yeah, I mean, I think Twitter's probably the easiest, or LinkedIn. My name's Alan Lee, Alanli. On Twitter, I'm Alan Lee Berkeley, AlanliBerkeley.
Well, I'll add that to the show notes. But Alan, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, and congrats again on the acquisition.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for having me. Thanks for creating an awesome platform and doing this.
Yeah, my pleasure. All right, cheers, man.
See ya.